Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Yitzchok Eisenman, and I'm so honored, Rabbi Yaakov Goodman from the Epic family, formerly Yedidim. Their website is myepicfamily.org, is part of a wonderful organization which involves itself in helping people parent their children. And they're having a global parenting summit. And this global parenting summit, I'm very proud to be part of. The organization itself, the Epic family, is involved in parenting seminars, not, although they're based in Eretz Israel, they have seminars throughout the United States. And of course, these videos, as part of the global parenting seminar, are available worldwide for anybody to view and hopefully to gain from wherever they are. As I usually tell people when they come to me to speak, I have no professional license. I am not a therapist. I don't masquerade as a therapist, and I never claimed to be a licensed therapist. I'm a Rabbi of a shul, Congregation Abbas Israel in Passaic, New Jersey. I write a column for Mishpacha magazine, Shul with a View. Do rabbinic work here. I teach at Lander College for Women, Truro, in New York City. And I try to help people when they come. So really, whatever Torah wisdom I have and or the experiences that I've had over the last 25 years in the rabbinate. So I'd like to share with you some thoughts. And the subject that I specifically wanted to deal with is we'll call them a child for the sake of simplicity, but as the child, the adult child who have left Torah mitzvah observance, are no longer living at home. How do we relate to them? And let me explain. There's a lot of good material, and there should continue to be a lot of good material out there regarding the rebellious child in the teenage years, which is we're quite familiar with. Children in their teenage years often go through a rebellious period, and there are different questions. The family makeup, how does the whole family dynamic change when there's a child who doesn't come to the Shabbos table or comes to the Shabbos table with a sense of disdain, and it can be a negative influence in the home, how to deal with them, how to keep the quote unquote the other children safe. And some of that obviously overlaps into the adult child. However, I don't want to focus on the teenage child in the home. I'd rather focus on the adult child who has already left the home and is no longer going through a rebellious teenage period, but rather they're an adult already. And as an adult, what I mean by that is not just let's say over 21, but they could be married already, could have a significant other. In unfortunately too many cases that we care to admit, they may be married to a non-Jew, which obviously has a host of other problems. They may be living with someone who obviously is not with Chup and Kedushin, but I'm dealing with the individual, the child, the individual who is on their own, out of the home. They have their own residence, and nevertheless, we want to keep that connection and that relationship between parent and child. We want to keep it as solid and as constant and as continual as possible. Meaning, we're no longer taking this child to a therapist of how they're dealing with their rebelliousness. We're not this individual, this adult, our child. We're no longer taking them to Rabbi X or Rabbi Y or sending them to Yeshiva Y or C or B. They're now an adult. Perhaps they have a job. yet they're committed to a life which is not committed to Torah mitzvahs. I'm not a big fan of those people who say, don't worry, they'll all come back. I don't know if they all come back. In fact, maybe in the future, but certainly in the short-term present, they don't all come back. They don't all come back because perhaps their commitment to a non-committed lifestyle is very real. It may be because of trauma they suffered when they were young. It may be because of influences which influence their thinking and their belief even in Hashem Yisbarach, belief in God. There are many, many reasons, and honestly, this is not a new problem. You know, that Rabbeinu Gershon, Ma'or Hagola, had a child who unfortunately did not follow the path of Torah and mitzvahs. So I think that's number one, there's acceptance that the parent has to have. The parent has to have a sense of acceptance that at this point, the therapy is over, unless obviously the adult child is reaching out for you to help them with therapy. That part of their life is over. You're not sending them to this camp or this rabbi or this yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael to straighten them out. They are straightened out. Perhaps they have a job even often. And perhaps they're honestly very stable and comfortable in their new life, albeit non-committed to Torah mitzvahs. Yet they're not addicted to drugs. They're not living an immoral life or a life of criminality in any way. They're just not living a Torah life. And they're committed to the life, meaning they're not interested at this point in living a Torah life. They know very well what a Torah life was. They were brought up with it. This can cause a lot of pain for any parent, obviously, when they see a child, an adult child, certainly not living a life of Torah mitzvahs. And I can tell you that unfortunately, the amount of, usually it's men, who leave religion, even after being married. I'm talking about men who were in Kolo for years, who have left the religion, gotten divorced, and now live a non-observant life is unfortunately growing. So how do we relate to these people? So I think one thing we have to accept as parents is that we have to accept them as human beings. They're no longer our children, that we have a right to dictate to them their life. It's not going to help. We've done that already. So number one, there has to be a sense of respect for the human being. Respect, your child wants your respect and your acceptance. The child doesn't want, the adult child usually, almost always, recognizes the fact that you are observant and you believe in Torah mitzvahs. They're not asking you to accept or condone another lifestyle, but they are asking you to accept them in their life's decisions. And that doesn't mean you support those decisions, and doesn't mean you encourage them or teach them. But it does mean that you're willing to bury the hatchet, and you're willing to accept them as human beings the way they've decided to live their lives. I know it's painful. And it's particularly, I found it's painful for the parent who's a Baal Tshuva. And they see that all the effort they did to change their lives and to raise their children in Torah mitzvahs, now they see their children, or one child, going off on a non-Torah way of life. But often I tell that parent, the parent of these Baalei Tshuva, the parents who are Baalei Tshuva, I say, your children actually are modeling your behavior more than others. Meaning you, as Baalei Tshuva, were raised in secular America, raised to be secular Americans. 3 days a year Jews, if that much. Yet you went off to wherever, or Sameach, Torah, Rachel, whatever it is, and you decided to change your life, everything about your life. Meaning you didn't grow up and embrace the lifestyle that your parents educated you with, raised you with. You rejected that lifestyle. You rejected their worldview. You rejected their actions, how they act and behave, how they eat, how everything in their life you rejected. You became an observant Jew. Why is it so shocking, therefore, that your own child, who saw his parents, had the ability and perhaps even the bravery to choose a different lifestyle than they were brought up with? So it's not so far-fetched that the child is given that, obviously, perhaps implicitly, but a message is often conveyed implicitly to the child that think for yourself, just like mommy and daddy, Abba and Ima, Tati and whatever, mommy, we thought for ourselves. So your children are modeling in many ways what you did. Obviously now you're upset. You're unfortunately disappointed. But it's important you keep that in mind, that your children have learned from you. And honestly, I think that's a built-in danger to any Bali Tshuva when they raise their children. Children, remember, learn more from actions than they do from speeches. So number one, your adult child, is now living out of the home. We won't deal with the non-Jewish spouse. Living out of the home. The first thing is, as I mentioned, acceptance to who they are as a person. At this point, you realize the arguments, the debates, the questions of God and religion, I think that should be off the table. It's not going to help. Contentiousness, argument, confrontation, that's not going to help the relationship. Number one, there should be acceptance of them as people. Number two, there should be approval of them as people. In those aspects of their life that you can embrace it. Perhaps they still have an interest in something that you had an interest in, whatever that was, Israel. Perhaps an interest in something else, science, who knows? Even sometimes, perhaps, if it's not contentious, perhaps even history, politics, whatever it is. But religion is probably going to be a contentious topic. So try to, besides accept them who they are, respect them for who they are. You'll get that much more in return. I'm not here to promise your child will ever return in full to the fold. And by the way, my only mantra is never say never and never say always. And people who have this basically blinders on and this one-size-fits-all attempt to dealing with people who are quote unquote struggling with religion, I think they're doomed for failure. There can never be a one-size-fits-all approach to anything in human relationships, because every human relationship is unique, because every human is really unique and complex. But nevertheless, there can be, hopefully, this idea of this connection between the child and you. And like I mentioned before, the burying of the hatchet and the trying to find common grounds on things that we can embrace, that's something very critical. I'm a big believer, if the adult child, not only the adult child, but the adult who wants to come for Shabbos or Yom Tov, means them traveling, the door is always open. That's been time tested, almost always proven. locking the door on someone, certainly an adult child, just keeps them locked out and keeps you locked in. Why? Yes, younger siblings may wonder, but honestly, it's not something which is contagious necessarily. Many times younger siblings or other siblings, older, will understand that this sibling went through perhaps a difficult experience. Or frankly, more often what I find is their other siblings are very happy being Orthodox Jews. They know there are Jews out there who are not religious. The fact that a sibling has chosen a different path is not always so shocking to them or so destabilizing. So the adult child, which is already living their life, so debating, arguing, I don't think. Not only I don't think pos- it's positive. I think it's a very negative way to approach it. Obviously, certain standards, kashrus, when they're in your house, obviously, whatever problem, not using a phone on the table on Shabbos, I think certain just respect to the home that can be expected. It's a fair expectation. Besides that, I think there has to come a point where the parent, the Orthodox parent, has to walk that tightrope of not showing approval or agreement with a non-Torah or sometimes even atheistic lifestyle or agnostic lifestyle, but nevertheless not showing disdain, disapproval, and dismissive of the adult child's choices in life. And I think you can do it. You can find that common ground. It's still your child. I'm sure they have good midos. I'm sure they have often good qualities. Perhaps they're charitable and they're using money that they're now earning in causes or helping people. And that obviously is something you should celebrate. And you should encourage them to join you, obviously, for Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's not just keeping the connection in the hope that they'll return. I always hope they'll return. But it's keeping the connection because they're your child right now and respecting them and recognize them for who they are now. And your adult child can tell the difference. They can tell the difference whether you have an ulterior motive in engaging them. Is your whole engagement for the sake of, one day they'll put back the yarmulke and tzitzis? Then honestly, they'll resent you for that. And they can tell the difference between that and when, no, my parent honestly loves me. And they're not going to think you're therefore approving of a non-Torah lifestyle. They're not going to think that. But they will say, wow, my parent, they're special people. I've chosen a different life. I've made different choices, even when they raised me. But they still respect me for a human being. They still respect me. They still love me unconditionally, without any strings attached, and without any expectations of my changing my behavior. When you reach that point, then you reach true love, true bonding, true connection. Am I going to say, therefore, the child will come back? No. But will I say that there's a relationship, a positive relationship, a loving relationship between parent and non-Torah observant adult child? Yes. At the end of the day, what do we want? Yes, of course, we want Yiddish and Achas, and we will have. But at the end of the day, we want family too. And the family has to stay together. And yes, there's a time during the teenage years where we put our best foot forward and our greatest effort and perhaps into changing a child or steering them away from the path that they were heading. And that was the correct way. But once they're an adult, once they've moved out of the house, once they have a stable, independent life, and they've chosen that that stable, independent life is one that does not include Torah mitzvahs, so then it's our job to, as I mentioned, stop the contention, bury the hatchet, and respect and love them for who they are. Ultimately, you will gain more. You will gain much more, and your child will gain much more. And ultimately, the bond between parent and child will be strengthened. And that's the clearest path for any sort of nachas with our children. Yes, life is complex, and nothing ends up exactly the way we thought it would be. That's the story of all our lives. But we have to realize there's a time to recognize the choices a person has made, respect them as human beings, and love them unconditionally, irrespective of the fact that their lifestyle is not the one you hoped they would live. And I want to thank you all for listening. Very much, I thank you. Because without even knowing it, you should know that if you've gained from this video, I'm very grateful. But as I always say, much more than I can do for anybody else, all of you do for me by listening. I wish you well. I thank Rabbi Yaakov Goodman again and his organization, the Epic family. I wish them much hatzlacha. We should all see the nachas from all our children. Thank you so much.